Well, retirement planning doesn't have to be overwhelmingly complicated, and it certainly doesn't have to be as complicated as some people make it out to be. Simplicity is so important. It's so important for Bowman Financial Strategies. And today we're going to lay it out for you, explain some of the strategies you can use, maybe explain a little bit more the beauty of simplicity when it comes to straightforward retirement planning.
Welcome to Uncommon Sense, where ordinary financial wisdom just doesn't cut it. Follow along with Erik Bowman as he provides clarity in a cluttered financial world.
Welcome in. Glad to have you on Uncommon Sense. I'm Ben George with Erik Bowman at Bowman Financial Strategies. Erik, I know when you log on your website, first thing you see is a message all about simplicity. So I know this is a very important topic for you.
Yeah, it's so important because I think when people start thinking about planning for retirement or begin to uncover, the complexities, they start to really quickly realize that it is way more complex than they ever thought. When you think about required minimum distribution rules, Social Security with the challenges and mistakes you can make in filing for Social Security that can cost you real money, errors in pension planning, errors in investment and distribution planning. I mean, there are real negative outcomes that can occur if you don't figure out how to kind of wade through those complex situations. And what I've done here in the firm is to come up with a way to simplify things. We actually call it the 80-20 retirement formula. And I don't know if anybody out there is really familiar with the Pareto Principle, also known as the 80-20 rule. But basically what it says is there's an imbalance out there. And this imbalance sounds something like this, that 20% of our inputs roughly create 80% of our outputs. That means of all the actions we take, there are a very few that are the most important, and you want to make sure you get it right. So when you think about the 80-20 retirement formula, we're talking about accumulate, protect, and avoid. Those are the three primary aspects of planning that you must look at hard and achieve. And if you do those, it's not like we don't work on the other details at all. We certainly do. But if you do those, you've probably done the majority of actions that will help you achieve retirement success.
Well, when you talk about, maybe I don't want to point fingers necessarily, but who do you think's to blame? Do you think a lot of people in the financial world, even advisors in some cases, are to blame for making things too complicated?
Well, I mean, think about everything that's involved in retirement planning is basically controlled by or dictated by the government. And we all know the government is a very complex place, complex rules. Once again, there's over 2,700 rules in the Social Security handbook alone, let alone ERISA law, which is federal law that governs pensions. You think about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, non-retirement accounts, and all of the different types of tax laws. So now we're talking about the IRS code book. You'd say, wow, probably no surprise that it is innately complex. But then advisors who like their job and, they kind of got into it because maybe they are a bit of an academic in some cases, they tend to use language that the average person does not understand, but it's easy to forget it because we live in it every single day. And we start talking about RMDs. There's a lot of people out there who don't know what an RMD is, a required minimum distribution, how it's calculated and when you have to take it and from where it has to come from. So that's just one brief example. So when we think about the complexity, it has to do with, by its nature, it's complex. But then an inability of the financial industry, I think, to simplify in such a fashion that a person who maybe is a teacher or an engineer, they weren't a financial professional, we need them to understand it in a way that they can make effective decisions from a position of being informed.
What role does technology play? Because it's supposed to make our life easier, right? We're able to look up anything we want to. People are watching this video right now, probably on their cell phone, potentially. Yeah. It should make things easier, but does it?
Well, you have to be very discerning when you're watching different educational videos that you might find out on the web, like you found ours, for example. So you have to be discerning, understand the source of the material, the primary source, to make sure that it is, for example, from the IRS or from the Social Security Administration, so you can validate the accuracy of what you hear. Plus, whenever you hear things that are like hyperbole, overstated in videos or advertisements you might get in your Facebook stream, for example. You have to kind of go, does it sound like that? And they're trying to grab your attention, and then I don't know what kind of message they may be trying to get across, but I think that most people benefit from just straight shooting. What is the information you need? Deliver it in a way that they understand clearly. And the technology that gives us access to all of this information means that within that bundle of information, there's some bad stuff out there, things that you should not follow, and you need to be discerning enough to be able to understand where you feel whoever's providing that information is credible and someone that you can trust.
Social Security planning can be complex, but you don't have to navigate it alone. Visit our one-stop Social Security resource at bowmanfinancialstrategies.com. Discover detailed videos, downloadable PDF guides, and the latest updates from the Social Security Administration. Don't let Social Security questions hold you back. Click the link in the show description and bring Social Security into focus.
All right, we're talking about the simplicity and the beauty of simplicity when planning. What do you think are some of the main areas? I know you mentioned Social Security is a big one. Are there any other areas that people really get tripped up on or get overwhelmed by in terms of complication?
Yeah, I mean, once again, going back to the 80-20 retirement formula, accumulate, protect, and avoid. So accumulate, there are ways to calculate based on the perceived expense needs of a couple in retirement or a person in retirement, what their accumulated assets, the value of their accumulated assets needs to be. So for example, if you have not accumulated enough assets, then you've got to be on a path to accumulate more assets. Maybe it's working a little bit longer, saving more into your 401k, or whatever the method may be. You need to have a larger lump sum of assets in some cases. So that accumulation formula is number one. Number two is protect. So we want to have assets that are invested in such a fashion that they can grow over time, but it's also, in our opinion, important that you have a specific amount of assets protected from market volatility. This becomes a very important source of ad hoc distributions in retirement, meaning as needed distributions in retirement, from a source that hasn't, for example, lost in a market downturn, that is still available, and you're not achieving this risk called sequence of return risk, meaning taking your money out in a down market, which we all know doesn't sound good when you sell low. So segregating assets for appropriate distributions by protecting some. In some cases, you also need to protect against loss of income. So that could be life insurance planning for some couples, as an example. Next, we have avoid. So the two primary things to avoid are, number one, avoid unintended and excessive taxation, which can be done with thoughtful planning, and also avoid bad Social Security filing errors. So Social Security has so many rules with it. Making the right decision the first time is the best way to achieve your goals. It's very hard to unwind decisions. I would say I wouldn't call them irrevocable, but they're all but irrevocable when you make your Social Security filing decision. So you want to avoid that in a case where you have very limited options to take a redo.
What are some of the first steps then people can take if they hear this 80-20? I know obviously getting in touch with you and sitting down and doing that, but are there anything they can do right now, any steps they can take to try to make things more simple for retirement planning?
Well, step one, hit the accumulation. So there's a saying out there that nobody has ever reached retirement and said, hey, I saved too much money. Like literally nobody says that, which means the opposite is probably true, that everybody reaches retirement and says, I wish I saved more money, right? So if that's the case, then the one action that you can take immediately is to begin saving more now. So if you're in a 401k and you're not maxing that out, and when I say max it out, I don't mean contribute up to the match of the employer. I mean meet the federally governed highest amount of money that you can put into that 401k, which in the year 2024 is over $30,000 a year per person who has a 401k. So I would, that's if you're over 50 years old. They call it the catch-up contribution, which lets you put in that extra amount. So that's step one, is just begin that behavior pattern of saving as much as reasonable, because you don't have a second chance at saving once you stop working. Some people are fortunate enough that there's some inheritance, and that's great when that happens, because then it helps offset maybe a lack of saving, or just puts enough cushion in their assets that they don't need to worry about having enough because they received an extra a couple $100,000 from mom and dad maybe. And that's a really good thing when it happens. But the bottom line is, save as much as you reasonably can, because you're not going to have another silver bullet of where money comes from in retirement.
What about from an avoid or protect standpoint? Is there any simple steps there?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to avoiding, you need to get educated on Social Security to avoid Social Security errors. We do public seminars and webinars on Social Security. We have a lot of videos actually available on our website where we dig into the basics of Social Security. So you want to get educated so that by the time you sit down with a retirement planner, you have some baseline knowledge of that. So you want to avoid excessive taxation. One way of avoiding excessive taxation would be, to the extent possible, can you create different buckets of money from a taxability perspective? And what I mean by that is, do you have some traditional IRA or traditional 401k money? Do you have some Roth IRA or Roth 401k money? Do you have some non-retirement money subject to capital gains tax, a totally different type of taxation? When you have this diversity of account types by taxability, when you approach or reach retirement, you have more control over your taxes than you ever had when you were working. Because when you're working, it's all taxable, right? They take it right out of your paycheck and you get what's left over. In retirement, you can pick and choose the sourcing of assets, which means you can literally control what tax bracket you're in, what type of tax you pay, and potentially the magnitude. If done correctly, relative to peers in a similar situation, you can pay significantly less in taxes. And then I guess the next one is protecting, right? So how do you protect assets? You know, when you're accumulating in the 401k, you're not really looking for some of those protection strategies. That's usually something you do when you enter into that retirement planning process. There are various tools that you can at your disposal to protect assets. I mean, just one brief example that's kind of come up over time are CDs. I mean, pretty well protected. You're going to get a guaranteed rate of return. Challenges, those rates of return aren't going to be around for long. As soon as interest rates come back down, you're going to see CDs lose their interest rate or growth power. But that's just like an example of how can you protect assets and still potentially attain meaningful growth.
All right, I love that. The 80-20 retirement formula. I know we'll probably dive deeper into that as we move forward, but you know, it is so important for simplifying things, and that is the key for a lot of people. For anyone that wants to reach out, Erik, and kind of set up that kind of initial meeting, what does that look like? I mean, do you go through the 80-20 formula up front, or are you trying to learn more about what their goals are?
Yeah, I mean, typically in a 20-minute conversation for somebody who's reaching out for the first time, we can determine what their primary goals and concerns are. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but we really need to understand, what are they trying to achieve? What's their timeline for retirement? What have they saved up in assets for that accumulation formula? And we really want to just dig in and understand if they have a specific concern. The way I ask that question is, if there's one or two things that literally are keeping you up at night, what are they? You know, if the answer is nothing, well, that's a great start. But most people have a concern or two, like, I want to make sure that my money is going to last until I die, no matter when that is. Or if I die, I want to make sure my spouse is okay. So no matter what, you make sure my spouse is okay. Those type of concerns are critical. And then within that meeting, towards the end of that, we can determine whether or not I can help. And if so, exactly what the next steps are. And we run a very systematic approach. I use really fancy names for these meetings. The first meeting is called meeting 1. The second meeting is called meeting 2, right? So there's this initial discovery, but then meeting 1 really is a thorough discovery, reviewing the financial position of the client and just really understanding more detail, gathering Social Security data, pension data, etc. And then we go into creating a plan. So in that second meeting, we would craft a complete retirement plan. That plan does come with a fee associated with it because it's very robust. It digs into every aspect of retirement planning, from Once again, income planning, tax planning, legacy planning, healthcare planning, and investments in retirement. So we're looking at all of those different categories and doing a deep dive analysis with firm recommendations on what we think that they should be doing. Many people get those plans and then they decide, I actually like the plan. I kind of wouldn't mind having you be my retirement planner. If that's the case, we actually waive the retirement planning fee. They onboard as a client going forward. If they decide not to become a client, then they're only on the hook for the fee itself for the plan. And the fee can vary by complexity of the planning required.
All right, very good. If you want to learn more, go to bowmanfinancialstrategies.com. On the front, you'll see a big green button, schedule your complimentary consultation. Click that, and you'll be on your way, taking your steps towards a more simple and hopefully successful retirement as well. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Uncommon Sense. Erik, appreciate your time. As always, I want to encourage anyone watching the video, if you made it this far, especially, please hit subscribe on the channel. It helps us continue to grow. We appreciate your support, and we'll be back with another video coming soon.
Thanks a lot, Ben.